Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello and welcome back to ABC's of Parenting Adult Children podcast, where we explore the real-life challenges and triumphs of navigating a relationship with our grown kids. Today's guest is Caroline Watson Kublinski. Is it Kublinski?
Yep.
A trauma therapist who's built her entire career on one core belief: therapy should actually help you feel different, not just talk in circles. Caroline's story doesn't start in a therapy office. It starts in the messy middle of her own life. So, Caroline, thank you for being on the episode. How are you?
I'm so great.
Good. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Okay, so I am Caroline Watson Kublinski. I am a licensed professional counselor and licensed chemical dependency counselor in the great state of Texas. I'm also licensed in 4 other states. I'm licensed in Louisiana, Colorado, Florida, and Alabama, and there's one more, but I can't remember what it is. No, Texas, that's the 5. So I'm a trauma therapist. I have been a trauma therapist. I started my career in 2017, actually working with young men with dual diagnosis and substance use disorder. And so that kind of catapulted me into, I have a master's in counseling and a master's in marriage and family therapy. And so working with families has been a huge part of what I do. I'm a believer that you just kind of show up and are who you are, and like God just does the rest. And I really love Jesus. I've also been known to say the F word. So, I try to have a good balance. So yeah, that's just a little about me.
Well, good. I want you to feel like you can be yourself. So if you need to punctuate a thought or something with a F-bomb every once in a while, that's fine. I don't think my listening audience is going to wilt because of that.
Okay. If they've got children that are a gong show, I don't think the F word is going to be the thing that takes them down.
My poor wife, she's such a loving, gentle, compassionate spirit. And I've been known to drop the F-bomb a lot. And James, stop using that word. You know I don't like that word. Stop it. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Now she doesn't, after 35 years, I think she has a filter that filters it out when yeah. So here's I have to share these. They're so funny. Ideas for episode titles. Main focus. You ready?
I'm ready.
Therapy for people who think therapy is bullshit. Trauma, tacos, and crying in public, a survival guide. I love that one. Perimenopause, parking lot fistfights, and other midlife plot twists. That is another priceless one. Crap therapists and the emotional damage they leave behind. How to survive life without faking your own death. I told you I had so much fun with your profile and ChatGPT coming up with titles for this episode. And I was like, wow, those are spot on. So are you a parent?
I am not. So I have bipolar 2 disorder, and my growing up was really, really hard. And so after kind of considering all of that, I decided that I didn't feel like I could do that to another kiddo. And so I got married in 2018, and then in 2023, I was 37, however old that makes me. We decided that we did want to have kids, and so we did a round of IVF, and that was a miserable $27,000 failure. The Lord has just really, I have always loved kids. I thought that I would work with kids. And then I was like, this is probably more a systemic problem. When people send their kids to therapy, a lot of times they say, okay, I just want you to fix my child, and they don't want to fix themselves. And so I thought, if I could work with the whole family system, then we could kind of get that going. So I do not have kids. I just have spent a lot of time helping people raise their children. And then just as my career has gone on, that's just been kind of a part of things.
Well, you're probably hoping that I don't say something like, well, if you're not a parent, you're not a subject matter expert, therefore we can't do this episode now. No, I'm not going to say that. anyway, a lot of, parenting is a struggle. Parenting
It's
is
a struggle.
it's a full-time job. And, I just want to say to the listening audience that you are a subject matter expert because you're in the weeds every day, right? And none of us are perfect. We're all human. We all make mistakes. Parents make mistakes. Kids make mistakes. We all make mistakes together. We all need therapy together or separately or all of the above. Yeah, or all of the above. And one of the things we talk about on this podcast is that, when parents bring their children to see the child psychologist or the family therapist or whatever the title of the professional is, right? Whatever the title is, a lot of times parents are shocked to find out that they need to work on themselves as well. That
Absolutely.
sometimes the kids are all whacked out because the parents are all whacked out. They brought emotional garbage from their childhood into the marriage relationship and then into the parent-child relationship. And my wife's been a special ed teacher for 25 years, and she just loves kids. And she has to write IEPs for all the
Yes.
children. And she tells me about these kids that act out in class and just horrible behavior. And of course, now some of these children are neurodivergent, and they have a special set of circumstances, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that creates an extra hurdles for them that normal kids may not have. Uh, but then she tells me about the parent teacher conferences that she has, and
Yes.
she's like, she's like, oh my God. She said, as soon as I spent 5 minutes talking to the parent, I was like, there's no wonder this child is screwed up
Yes.
because the
Yes.
parents have a hard time with their emotions. They're cursing, they're yelling, they're screaming. They don't know how to interact like an
Yeah.
adult.
They're
you know?
completely emotionally dysregulated. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so yes, self-care is a huge topic on our podcast, and we tell people that self-care is not selfish,
Right.
especially to the mothers. It's like, you need to take time out and take care of yourself. You need to go
Right.
have a Starbucks or go out to the park or go ride a horse or
Yeah.
do
You
whatever
can't
it
fill
is.
from the empty bucket.
No, you cannot. And so yeah, it's good that parents understand that they need to find a quiet space where they can do some
Yeah.
introspection, and try to understand why they're reacting the way they are to their children and the antics that the kids come up with. And anyway, like I told you before we hit the record button, my dad was a drill instructor for 26 years, and my mother was Austrian, which was European descent, and so they were both huge authoritative figures in our lives, and so they expected us kids to be perfect. They expected us to be seen but not heard. And wow. So yeah,
Okay, I want to plug a book real fast on this.
yeah, absolutely.
It's called You're on Fire. Sorry. It's called You're on Fire, and That's Okay. I can't remember. Her name is like Katie or Megan Samad, and it's spelled very weirdly. Her first name is, but I recommend that to my parents that I'm working with their, my high school kiddos. And it is phenomenal, just about parents learning how to regulate themselves so that they're not compounding what is happening with their child. It has been a really great resource. I mean, just for me as a therapist, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And this is so good.
Right. And we can put that book and your website in our show notes. So, and while we're talking about your book, let me share the website window. Whoops, what have I done? I'll get it together. Hold on.
Okay. It's the story of my life. Just give me a minute and I'll have this all figured out.
I have too many windows open. Window. Yes, there we go. Share. So, mental health therapy in Richardson, Texas.
Yes. And I also, my Instagram and my TikTok are Bruised Banana Counseling. That is kind of my approach to therapy. My SEO guy is like, you need to have a brand. And I'm like, no, this is too great. Because I just kind of view life as, we're all kind of like bananas. And all of a sudden you look up and you're like, I'm just a little bruised. And I think that that is a really great model for therapy of like, even if you haven't had some huge something that's like this huge black bruise, just moving through life is really hard. And so having an objective ear that's just like, okay, how do we help you be the best you that you can be? And so that's where Bruised Banana Counseling came from.
That is hilarious. Bruised Banana Counseling. I
Yes.
like that. So this is www.cwkcounseling.com. That's very clinical. Very
That's
clinical
it.
sounding.
Yes.
Yes. That's the professional side of Caroline.
Yes. That's about as professional as it gets.
There you go. All right. So how did you go from hot mess to therapist, and why should anyone trust you?
Well, I think that I show up really authentically. My story has been I have bipolar 2 disorder. And so I've had that. I mean, I can remember being 4 and feeling so emotionally dysregulated. And that's kind of where my eating disorder started. I didn't feel okay inwardly. And so I was like, there's got to be something going on outwardly that's making this happen. So I've been in recovery since 2020 from my eating disorder. I didn't get diagnosed with my bipolar 2 until I was 25. And so I spent my high school years self-medicating with alcohol and pot and cocaine, and went to treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, summer after my senior year, and was sober for 3 years and really kind of learned a lot about myself and kind of got myself together, and graduated from college and went to TWU, which is a really great school here in Texas, to do pre-nursing stuff. And so I got on Zoloft, maybe, I can't remember which one it was, and it flipped me into a hypomanic episode. And so here's a really great story. I went to my statistics final and I was trying to take it, and I was like, I'm going to jump out of my skin. And so I went up to my professor. I was like, I'm having an emergency. And he took one look at me and he was like, you should go to the health services. So that's when I got diagnosed. And that was really one of the most freeing things that had ever happened to me, because there was now a reason behind the way I felt, and therefore there was a solution. And so I think that that gives me a lot of empathy for, the adult that's struggling, but also the parent that's struggling to deal with their person. So went to nursing school, and a guy that I'd been dating off and on for 5 years, who I met when he was sober, ended up relapsing, and he overdosed in 2010 and ultimately died. And so
Wow.
I had a nervous breakdown. I flunked out of nursing school. It was a whole ordeal. And so I nannied, I did some kind of things. And then in 2014, I decided, okay, am I going to be a teacher, or am I going to get a master's in counseling, and chose to get a master's in counseling. And since then, God has just oriented one thing after another. I mean, it's crazy how I even ended up at my job and then going into private practice in 2021. And I mean, God has been so faithful to me. Like, I feel like maybe Romans 8:28 gets a little overused, but I mean, that is just the story of my life, that God works everything together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose and for his glory. And that has been, that is the mantra of my life.
That's awesome. See, probably from the ages of 18 to about 26, I was a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Literally.
Same.
And it's only by the grace of God that I'm sitting here talking to you. And I could very easily have wound up in some sort of horrible addiction. I could have easily wound up in prison or dead, one of the three. And it's only by the grace of God that he brought me through all of that. I actually spent 45 days in a street rescue mission called Star of Hope mission when I was in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I spent 45 days there, and I wasn't there because of any kind of addiction, but I lost my job, lost my car, didn't have a place to stay, and I had 3 plastic bags of belongings, and I lived under a bridge for like a week.
Wow.
And a believer, he owned a coffee warehouse. His job was to He drove a van around Houston, Texas, delivering coffee to the different businesses that were his customers. And he came by, and obviously I looked homeless, right? And he was like, what's your story? And I told him my story, and he was like, well, I know a guy that runs this Christian rescue mission downtown, and I can call him for you and see if I can take you down there. And I'm like, sure, anything beats living
Yeah.
under a bridge with 3 plastic bags of belongings, right?
Yeah.
And
In Houston, Texas.
yeah. And so I wound up staying in his warehouse. He had a cot in a place I could take a shower, and I think I mowed the grass around the warehouse and cleaned it up, and I made some money. Make a long story short, I wound up in front of the Star of Hope mission. My big issue was pride. I thought I was better than everybody, and I was raised in a white, middle aged or middle class family in Quinlan, Texas. And when I wound up at the Star of Hope mission, there were these, smelly guys cursing, and they were sleeping on pieces of cardboard out in front of the mission. And I was like, I told God right then and there, I was like, I'm better than this.
Yeah.
And oops. And so I wound up wasting that money I had earned, and I went to a hotel or a motel across the street. And I was there for about a week, and I ran out of money. And I was back right out in front of Star of Hope Mission, and the one of the counselors came out and asked what my name was. And I told him, and he says, "Oh, we've been expecting you a week ago." And anyway, make a long story short, they make you listen to the gospel message 3 times a day before you can eat a meal, right? And they kick you out
Wow.
at 7 a.m. in the morning to go find jobs, blah blah blah. So my question to God was, because I had accepted Jesus into my heart as Lord and Savior when I was 17 years old. So I didn't need to hear the gospel message. I already had that. I had my admit one to heaven card in my pocket, right?
Right.
And I kept asking God, why me? What have I done to deserve this, right? Because it was almost as bad as going to jail. It was
Yeah.
horrible surroundings. Anyway, after lots of prayer and listening to, they had churches would come in and do the music and preach the sermons and stuff, and I talked to some of their counselors, and I don't know, it wasn't an audible voice, but one day I heard, well, James, it's not what you've done, it's what you haven't done. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says you're saved, and he says your name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and I have a purpose for your life, and it's my purpose, not yours. I saved you for a purpose. And so I was full of pride, and I thought I knew better, about all sorts of stuff. And so I had to humble myself and come to the realization that, oh wow, God did save me, and and he has a purpose for my life. And so from that point on, when I came to that realization, then he was able to work in my heart and my mind and my spirit and get me to a place where I could be teachable, trainable, and moldable,
Yeah.
to do kingdom work. And anyway, I wound up getting off the streets and wound up in street ministry for 10 years in Houston. So I have a real place in my heart for homeless people, because
Yeah. I love that.
I've been there, done that, and didn't have a
Well,
t-shirt.
and I mean, coming back to that thing of pride, that's one of the things I do get the opportunity to do some Christian counseling. And it's kind of flowed over into my other, but I mean, like, that's the reason Satan got kicked out of heaven, is because of his pride. And that's such an easy space for us to fall into, because we all think that we have all the answers. And so when we think that we have all the answers, we're looking around going, well, if you just do what I told you to do, we wouldn't be in this mess. And that itself is pride, and it never gets us anywhere.
Right, right. Well, I had to get to the end of the rope. I had to hit rock bottom before he got my attention, and he got my attention.
Yeah.
I'm I'm still working through the justification of our salvation. Every day, is a new day, and I'm not perfect. I still sin. I still make mistakes. I don't want anybody to think that I've arrived at all
Yeah.
understanding
Hadn't
and all
figured it all
knowledge,
out.
because
Right.
I haven't. And the older I get, the more I realize what I don't know. Right. So anyway, Yeah, it's I think it's good that and I had a somebody in my Facebook support group that wrote me a private message on Facebook and said, "I don't think I can be a member of your parenting support group because it's faith-based." And I was like, "What?" And so I don't I try to practice DEI, right? Diversification, equality, inclusion. I don't really care what somebody's faith is.
Right.
It's yeah, I don't care if you're Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, whatever.
Yeah.
You can worship a cow. I don't care, whatever. Because your religion and your God is something very personal to you, right? And so I don't shy away from my faith, but I also don't want to proselytize. I don't want to use
Absolutely.
I don't want to use that platform or this platform to proselytize anybody.
Right.
And so my encouragement for people is that there are a lot of churches out there that are good churches, and they have pastoral counseling, and they have programs that are designed to help the family unit, right?
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with you investigating that, right? And I want to encourage people to tap into the God of the universe, right?
Right.
Whoever that God
Well,
is for you.
and spending time in the 12-step community, I mean, that is, people start out where like your higher power can be the doorknob if it's going to help you stay sober. And so I think that that's oftentimes whether you end up in a place of Christianity or you don't, if they're like, this world is kind of horrible and it feels really horrible when your children are breaking your heart. And if there's no sense of something out there that can aid in that healing, I mean, that's a really hopeless place to be. And so my clients come from differing faith backgrounds, and some of them have a no faith background. And when it comes to the family system, you have to figure out, okay, where can we find some hope here, and where can we translate that to the rest of our family?
So, how do you explain trauma to someone who says, "Oh, but my childhood was fine. I had a perfect childhood."
Yes, that's one of my favorite questions. So, trauma is totally subjective. What is traumatizing to one person may not be traumatizing to another. I mean, if we think about kiddos that grow up in war torn countries, their trauma level, barometer, thermometer, whatever you want to say, is very different than somebody that grows up in America. So, in thinking through that kind of lens, it's all subjective. And we also have to take into account, attachment style. And attachment style is somewhat born into who we are, because people could grow up in fantastic families and still have this anxious attachment that says, I'm not okay, but you're okay. Or they may have an avoidant attachment style that says, you're okay, you're not okay, but I'm okay. And so, everything is not the parent's fault. I think that's what I want people to really take away from what I'm saying today is nothing, there is no such thing as something being all or nothing. And so, trauma depends on inner resiliency. That's why two people, my best friend and her sister, grew up same family. She is extremely responsible, like owns her own home, like does all this stuff. And her sister overdosed and died, and her baby was in the bed crying until somebody came and found him. So I mean, like, same family, two totally different things. And so I think that plays a big part in it. I also think that, sometimes more people than others, just things hit them differently. I have a really tender heart, and things that, there's some stuff going on politically right now that, I'm really grieved over. And my mom texted me this morning and she was like, you're spending too much time on that. And I was like, I was like, you don't have to feel the same way that I feel, and that's okay. But, I think that trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you and what happens to that um, to that experience. And so do you have a support system around you that can aid you in recovering from that? During 9/11, there was so much, the EMDR people and the trauma therapists all came in, and the people that experienced that together that were actually at ground zero, the level of PTSD that they had was significantly lower than it should have been, because they were in a community of other people that could grieve with them. And so I think that's, part of the reason that your podcast is so great is there's a whole community of people that are experiencing the same traumatic experience of their kids being hard and wayward and whatever other way you want to say. And so when there is a community around you, that PTSD component of trauma can be significantly lower. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So why do so many people leave therapy saying that didn't do jack?
Because they've got a shit therapist.
Do you remember that game? Do you remember the game called You Don't Know Jack?
Yes.
It was like Trivial Pursuit, but you played it on a computer.
Yes.
And if you got the answer wrong, this guy got on there real sarcastic, going, "You don't know Jack. You're an idiot."
Yes. I think that some people go to therapy and they're not ready for therapy. And so that's why it's not helpful. You have to show up to therapy ready to work. Nobody's going to be able to do it for you. So I think that's one thing. But I think there's a lot of bad therapists out there that are, one, crazy themselves, and two, they have not worked out their own stuff. And so if you haven't worked out your own stuff and you're being a therapist, you are projecting that onto your clients, and it's unethical. I think a lot of times I've been really thinking about, and I wrote a blog about it, like, what's the difference between a trauma therapist and a non-trauma therapist? And a trauma therapist is looking at where did this come from, not just changing the behavior. And so cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, those are both skills driven, and insurance loves those. But to really get down to something, you have to be willing to look at the bigger picture of things. And so I think a lot of people go to therapy and the therapist is not going down. I have people that come into my office. I had one woman that came in, she was like 70, and we started kind of diving into her background. She had been like adopted, and she'd been like molested and like all of this stuff. And she was like, I've never talked about all this. I was like, you've been in therapy for like 5 years. What do you mean you've never talked about any of this?
Wow.
So, I think that finding a good therapist is really important. And I think that, here's my own soapbox, if you can't find a personal reference for a therapist, do not go see them, because you don't know what kind of person they are and if they are going to do damage. And a bad therapist can do a lot of damage, because they can blame the person they're working with for things that are not theirs to take responsibility for.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, nuts.
How do you talk to someone mid-addiction spiral without sounding like a Hallmark card?
This is one I think that depends on personality. I am a real straight shooter. And so my clients, and I think it also depends on the client, but also, it depends on, is somebody ready to get sober? I think that's a huge one. But the other part of it is just like laying it out there of like, and nobody starts out wanting to be a heroin addict. Nobody spends their 4-year-old, in kindergarten being like, what do you want to be? And somebody's like, I'm going to be a heroin addict. Like, that doesn't happen. So allowing grace for like exploring, help me understand how this happened. I think that's a huge one, that it makes people feel understood instead of judged. And I think there's practical solutions that also go with that. So it's like, okay, I'm a harm reduction therapist. And so, if somebody is doing heroin, there's something called kratom that has kind of a similar property. And I'm like, okay, are you willing to switch to kratom? And like, let's get you on that where you're not going to get fentanyl and overdose. And so I think it's all about working with addicts and alcoholics is about creating a place of compassion and empathy. I also think that it is really different for a therapist or some sort of mental health person to be talking to one of those people than it is their family member, because there's not the dynamic there that has been there before. And the company that I started my career with, one of the huge blessings of that job was I just got to meet my client where they were, and I got to love them for who they were at that moment. And their families, because there's so much shit show that goes on with all of that. And there's addiction is not personal, but it's also very personal. And so it's really hurtful. And so creating a space where the client can come in and feel that unconditional positive regard, I think is really important without patronizing them. And, it's like so while I was in grad school, I taught preschool in the mornings and then I tutored in the afternoons. And I wasn't doing like rocket science tutoring. I'm tutoring like first graders and third graders and like seventh graders. But the thing, if you want to like ruin your relationship with your children, try to do homework with them, because the things that make you crazy about your child, when you have to do homework with them, they're like magnified times a million. And I don't think that it used to be like that. I really don't. I do have a specific memory though of trying to do spelling with my dad, and it was the OUs and like double or trouble or whatever it was. And I just could not wrap my mind around that. And I remember him getting so pissed at me. It is still like a very vivid memory in my brain. But so it's the same thing with working with people in addiction. You are the things that make you crazy about your children and the hurtful things that happen, or your spouse or whoever it is, whatever the dynamic is there. It makes it really hard for you to be able to interact with them from a neutral standpoint. And most communication is neutral, and it depends on, what's the relationship? What's the status of the relationship? Is it in a good or a bad place? Has the other person, are they hungry? Are they tired? Whatever. Have they had a bad day? Did they stub their toe? Like whatever the deal is. And so when there's communication and it's in a bad place, depending on where each party is, they're going to attribute that conversation, that communication negatively or positively. And so I think in families, especially in families that are listening, moms and dads that are listening to this podcast, like the hard parts of your children, you might be saying something neutrally or they might be saying something neutrally, but it gets attributed negatively because there is such a strain on the relationship.
Yeah, and I think family history comes into play there too. There's
Absolutely.
just a lot of, for better or for worse, there's maybe a lot of garbage in the background that hasn't been dealt with, or the blame game, the judgment game, the he said, she said, all of that mess. They're just
Yes.
family dynamics are
Yes,
complicated.
no, family dynamics. And so I work from a family system standpoint, that we are all a part of the constellation of our family. And so even if I'm not doing family therapy, I am working with this person through the lens of how do you fit into the bigger picture? And so even if the family members do not want to get healthy, like how do we create an environment where you can function within a dysfunctional system and be healthy yourself and have boundaries and have standards and all of that kind of stuff? I think that that is a huge component of working with all of this, that, if you want to get healthy, but your kid doesn't, or whatever it is,
Right.
Figuring out how do you find peace within the family system. I think that's a huge part of this.
Well, and I think it's important to state that we're all responsible for our own place in life, our own happiness. I can't make you happy. You can't make me happy, right? Happiness means different things to different people.
Right.
And I think that we have to own our own garbage. We can't say, well, I'll do this work in therapy as long as they'll do their work in therapy too.
Yes.
because not everybody in the family is going to want to come together all at
No,
once and do therapy,
absolutely.
right?
Right.
So whether it's the parent or whether it's the child, somebody's going to have to take the higher road and do what needs to be done, right?
Right.
Because if everybody's looking at other people to go, well, my therapy is going to and success in therapy is going to be dependent upon how well you do.
Right.
It can't work like that.
Well, and so we call that the all change first principle of, regardless of what you do, I am going to do these things. And it's not going to be quid pro quo. It's not going to be dependent on if you do. I'm going to change first. And if you choose to change, then great. And if you don't, I'm still going to have the autonomy to do that.
Right. As you were talking about your experience with your dad about the use and spelling, and you'll like this. I had a problem with multiplication tables.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't wrap my brain around. To this day, I suck at math. Right? If that's what calculators are for. You want me to do math?
Yes.
Hold on. Let get on my iPhone and open the calculator app, and I'll do it real quick.
Absolutely.
But my dad, the way he taught me multiplication tables, or inspired me, or encouraged me, or threatened me to get it done, was if I didn't have my multiplication table homework done correctly, and he was a wizard at math, I couldn't watch the Dallas Cowboy game on Sunday.
Wow. That's
My
amazing.
God. Yes. Man.
Talk about a motivator.
I studied my ass off, man. I was prepared for the Dallas Cowboy game on Sunday,
Yeah.
But anyhow.
Well, and that's another great point of, like, when you are working with people that are either young or old, you got to figure out what their motivation is. And some children are very hard and you can't figure out their motivation. And then I guess you have to consult a therapist. A lot of times, if you can find what motivates people, you're going to be able to make a lot of traction with them. Yeah.
So what's the most thankless, gut-wrenching, underrated job in the world?
It's a great question. I think it's caregiving of any kind. Caregiving of being a mom, caregiving of, your wife works with special ed kiddos. I mean, that has such a, spectrum of things. And I think, so my sister-in-law died in November of 2014, and my husband and I were her caretakers. And it is really interesting. And from a parental standpoint too, all of the work that goes into caretaking and all of the thoughtfulness behind it and the hard parts that go with that, I think don't always get recognized. And so whether that's a mom or a dad or, a nanny or a teacher, I think that having that caretaker position, I think that so often, it's like, well, that's a given. Of course you'd do that. But a lot of people wouldn't. And so I think, thinking through how do you appreciate the caregivers in your life, I think that is, that's a huge one to me.
Yeah, caregiving is tough.
And it's tough for things that you never would think that it's tough for. It's the things that on the days that you're tired that you don't want to do X, Y, and Z, you still have to do X, Y, and Z. And so, I think that we live in a pretty narcissistic society where everybody feels pretty entitled to get whatever they want. And that's not good or bad. I mean, everybody has narcissistic traits. I'm not saying that everybody has narcissistic personality disorder, because that is not true. And that makes me crazy, but we all have some narcissistic traits. And so
every time you say that word, I think of people in the political realm.
Yes. Oh my Lord. I have a client that everybody's a narcissist. I'm like, no, they're an asshole. No, they're selfish. They're not a narcissist. And so, going with that everybody is kind of used to getting what they want. And the caretaker role, I think, is sometimes exploited because a caretaker can turn into the codependent and the people pleaser really, really quickly. And those people, when there's codependence and when there's people pleasing, the fuse is long, but it eventually catches on fire. And the people around them are like, what happened? And people are like, I've been doing all this stuff for you and no one cares. And, and then everybody thinks they're crazy. But like, really, people just haven't been caring for each other the way that they should have all along.
So why do you make jokes in therapy sessions? Isn't trauma supposed to be serious business?
If you can't laugh at the fuckery that goes on in life, like, you're screwed. Like, it's ridiculous. I've always had dark sense of humor. I also think that starting working in the substance use world, that is just a world of heartache. And if you can't laugh, at what's going on, it's just too horrible. With my sister-in-law, she was sick for 5 years, and we would say, like, somebody's got to get something out of this. And so we were like, we played the cancer card every time we could. Like, something would happen and we'd be like, well, my sister-in-law has cancer, and people would be so uncomfortable that they'd be like, okay, let's do whatever you want to. And I think that, laughing produces all of those feel-good hormones. It produces dopamine and all of that stuff that regulates your nervous system. And I'm just a pretty funny person anyway, and so I can't imagine not throwing that in my practice. But life is just crazy. And if you can't observe the craziness of things and see just the wildness, the paradox, the paradigm shift, all of that stuff, then you're really missing out on a huge part of life. I think that, laughter is medicine. That is saying for a reason. And, when you're in the depths of despair and, thinking that nothing is ever going to get better, to be able to find something to laugh about, that provides respite. And I think it's really important, especially when really hard stuff is going on. We all take ourselves extremely seriously. And so, I think finding places to laugh is really important. And I think it depends on where your client is too in their grieving process. For a parent that has just had a child that's died, I mean, I'm not going to go in and start making jokes. Like, that's not helpful. That's insensitive.
Yeah, there's a time and place for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So who's your favorite stand-up comedian?
I am loving me some Leanne Morgan right now.
Okay.
I started watching her during the pandemic.
Leanne Morgan.
Yes.
Okay. I'll have to watch her.
And she's clean comedy. And she talks all about just being a woman and what it's like to be a mom and a wife. I mean, it just so resonates with so many people, and she's just unapologetically herself. And I just like her new show just came out on Netflix, and then I've listened to her audiobook, and we watch her stand up. If I'm ever having a hard time, my husband turns on Leanne Morgan, and I'm like, I have got to quit listening to her because I'm going to go on these podcasts and I'm going to sound like a hick. So I love her. I also really love John Crist, who's another clean comedian.
John who?
John Crist. He also grew up in the church. And so a lot of the things that he experienced.
How do you spell that?
Crist. Like
Okay.
Christ, but not.
Okay. No H.
Yes. So he grew up in the church. And so the things that he makes jokes about are a lot of things that I totally get. Another one is Nate Bargatze. Also,
yeah, he's one of my favorites.
Yes, we're all going to see him in November. And I'm listening to his audiobook right now. It is hilarious.
Really?
So good. And then I also love Bert Kreischer, who is like horrifically irreverent. We've been to see him, I think, twice here in Dallas. And I just think that he is so funny and so ridiculous. He just is a ridiculous person. But he and his wife love each other. Oh my gosh, they love each other. And seeing the clips of them on his Instagram, I mean, it's really, again, like he is so irreverent. Probably a lot of your podcasters listeners would be like, that is horrible, and I question her for thinking that. But those are we love stand-up.
Okay.
That's one of the things that my husband and I started doing when my sister-in-law was sick, is we started going to stand-up shows.
I love watching Netflix stand-up comedy, and I've seen
Yes.
all of the ones that are worth watching ad nauseum. Taylor Tomlinson, do you know who she
Yes.
is?
Yes.
Oh my God, she is so funny. And so Fluffy is one of my top ones. You know
I
Fluffy?
haven't watched that. I know who that is, but I haven't watched it.
Oh my God, you have got to watch Fluffy. Fluffy is the funniest. He's a big fat Mexican dude.
Yes.
And he's lost a lot of weight though. And I can say fat because I'm fat, right? So not making judgments on anybody's body size or body shaming. He's a huge dude, right?
Yeah.
But he's been doing stand-up comedies for 27 years, and he has
Wow.
a whole history of all of that. Anyway, Fluffy is,
Okay,
I'm
we'll
telling
watch
you,
it.
you're missing out on Fluffy.
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle.
Yes, another one.
I had a white person. Let's just say I've spent time in law enforcement. I've spent time in private security. I've worked in a mental hospital in Terrell, Texas. I've had some
Wow.
tough jobs over
Yeah.
time, and I've seen some tough things. I've experienced some tough things because of that. And I was working a security job 3 to 11 with a friend of mine. We both worked the same shift, and we played spades in between rounds. And we talk. She's a single mother, blended family, blah blah blah. Her husband is African American. Not her husband, her boyfriend, her significant other. And so we were talking, and his name was, my God, what was it? Clifford. Clifford, right? And
Love it.
you know Dave Chappelle and his he has a whole spiel about Clifford the big black N-word, right?
Yeah.
And so we were talking, and she had him on speakerphone, and we're talking, I didn't care that he's black, whatever. And so we were talking, and I made the comment about, I told Clifford, I said, hey, have you watched Dave Chappelle? And I even brought it up on my phone and went to Netflix and brought up the actual comedy skit about where Dave Chappelle's talking about Clifford. He thought it was funny. And then like 5 minutes later, Brandy looked over at me and she said, "You're not supposed to like Dave Chappelle." And I looked at her and said, "Why? Because I'm an old white guy? I can't like Dave Chappelle?" I mean, I just like his, and he has a different flavor of comedy, right?
Yes.
He's not funny like Fluffy, but he talks about life, and he talks about life situations, and he says it how it is. He has a very unique perspective on life and events that have happened in his life and other people. And he talks about Bill Cosby and all this other stuff, but that's what I love about Dave Chappelle, is his perspective on life and how he frames those things, right? And relates them.
Talk about their humor and therapy. I mean, there is so much that goes on in this world that, like John Crist was talking about it, that comedians, they just look at the world differently. They see things that the rest of us see every day and just kind of look through. But comedians, they see it and they see the funny parts of it.
Yeah, and they say things that we think, but would never dare to say it out loud.
Yes, exactly.
Right? They get up. That's why they make so much money, because they get on stage and they make fun of all of us. They're like, and there's an Italian stand-up comic, and I can't think of his name, but
he has real dark hair and he's like muscular.
Yes.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
He makes fun of his wife, and he talks about the Italian family dynamic. And let's see, Wanda Sykes is another one that I like to listen to.
Yeah.
She is very political in a lot of her stuff, and some of that stuff I just have to filter through my brain and go, okay, yeah, it's funny, but I don't agree with her politics, whatever. So anyway, so I think that comedy can be very therapeutic. And
Yes.
so I know some people in my listening audience are probably thinking, why in the world are we talking about stand-up comedy?
Yeah,
Well, because it's good to laugh.
it
It is
is.
good to laugh. I'll just make it really real here, right? I'm retired after 30 years in IT, and I work a part-time security job at Walmart at night driving a patrol vehicle, right? And so keeping it real, I watched a guy OD.
Wow.
Somebody came up to the car, said, "Hey, this guy slumped over in the parking lot." I knew exactly who he was talking about. And I said, "Is he in a wheelchair?" Yes. So went over there. The off-duty police officer came over and helped me. We got him out of the wheelchair, started CPR on him, called the 911. Oh my God, that's just a horrible example of how tough things can get, right?
Yes.
And I, they got a faint pulse on him, loaded him in an ambulance, and took him to the hospital. I hope he survived. He's a veteran, served in the Navy for years, and he wound up on the street. He's addicted to God knows what. It's the homeless population is tough. I
Yes.
see it every day at work. And I use that as an example to say that, okay, people listening to this podcast episode, you may not see those kind of things, right? You may not be
Right.
exposed to addiction, homelessness, violence, whatever, right? But and you being a trauma therapist, you'll probably agree with this. We all have our own version of that. All have our own things that we're exposed to that maybe I won't even be able to relate to,
Yeah.
right? But just because it's not doesn't mean it's not traumatizing to you,
People.
right?
Well, and that's exactly, trauma is subjective. And so other people could experience that and it be something that, really sticks with them. Whereas you having your experience with the homeless population and, all of the life experience that you have had makes that completely different.
Well, and it does affect me,
Hmm.
right? It does affect me. I have a sensitive spirit, somewhat tenderhearted. I'm not going to admit on camera that I'll watch a movie and cry about it, because
My husband's a crier.
that's going to screw up my tough guy persona, right? But anyway, yeah, it affects me. Like I still can't get the guy's image out of my head.
You need some ART. You need some accelerated resolution therapy. I'll just wipe that right out.
Yeah, I need some comedy. But anyway, that's my therapy is stand-up comedians.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry I went down a rabbit hole there for way longer than I should have.
Well, so let me kind of put in this that a lot of times in families where raising children, especially adult children, it feels like there's such a disconnect. Finding things like that can be really connecting. So, watching some stand up together, like finding a show to watch together, like those things can be, and it's passive enough that you're not having to kind of really interact, but you're still spending time together. um, I think that that could be a really great thing to do with your kid.
Good. So, if you could give one piece of encouragement to a parent who feels disconnected from their adult child, what would it be?
You have to fill up your bucket first. If you are trying to fix them, well, first of all, you can't fix them. But if you're trying to fix them before you have your own, I mean, to use the old thing, before your own oxygen mask is on, it is never going to go well because you are projecting onto them what's happening with you. And so, I think that that's a big one. I also think that having a community around you that are in a different place than you are in your journey with your child, because when you're in the thick of things, you're like, this is never going to be over. But to be around people that are in a different spot, I think can be really, really helpful. I think another thing is, kind of depending on your child's specific struggle, is to not give up on them. Like families, we don't get to choose our family. And so you can have boundaries with them. Like they're not going to run all over you, but like they're still your child. And, you know, that's not to say that maybe you need to take some time off or do something like that. But I think that having hope for change. And if you don't have the space for hope, to borrow some from somebody else, whether that's a therapist or a friend or whoever it is that can see reconciliation in this situation. I think that is really, really important. And I also think it's important to everybody needs some grace. Your child needs some grace. You need some grace. And especially as parents, I think that so often parents are like, what did I do wrong? Like, how did this happen? But everybody has autonomy. We are not responsible for the things that happen to us, but we are responsible for what we do with that. So, allowing your child to blame you for all of this stuff, like that just is not true. And so allowing for yourself to have the freedom in that, it's a long answer, but
that's okay. So where can our listeners learn more about your work and connect with you? So Bruised Banana Therapy, is that what you said your brand is?
Yes, Bruised Banana Therapy on TikTok and Instagram. And I have kind of all over the map of different topics on there. And then my website is cwkcounseling.com. There is a lot of information, resources to help people figure out if they need a therapist, how do they find one. Just explaining therapy in general, I think is really helpful. A lot of people don't understand therapy. And so it gives kind of some bite-sized pieces of this is why this is important. This is what, according to Caroline, this is what that should look like. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Caroline, I appreciate you being on the episode today. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah, and I appreciate all the things you've walked through in your life and how that God has healed you and a lot of those things, and He's allowed you to bring healing to other people, and you're paying it forward, and that's wonderful.
Yes, I love my job. Love it.
Yeah. So the listening audience, I'm going to say that wraps up another heartfelt conversation here on the ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast. A huge thank you to Caroline for sharing her wisdom, honesty, and practical advice on navigating the complex but rewarding journey of parenting grown children. Her insights remind us that parenting doesn't end when our kids become adults. It simply evolves into a deeper relationship built on respect, boundaries, and love. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a fellow parent who could use some encouragement and levity, laughter.
Absolutely.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode where we tackle the real issues of parenting with grace and intention. Until next time, remember, parenting adult children isn't about control, it's about connection. And thank you for the privilege of your time. Caroline, Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed this.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye. Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.